Greetings in Christ, everybody, and welcome to Meet the Catechism. I am Steve Green, Director of Holy Family Institute of Catholic Faith and Life, and today we are talking about paragraph number 32. You may remember, if you saw the video for paragraph number 31, if not, you might want to go and watch that one first, that I'm recording individual Meet the Catechism videos for paragraphs number 31, 32, and 33 in sequential order because the three of them are kind of mutually interconnected. They're under the heading Ways of Coming to Know God. And what the Catechism means by that at this early stage of the Catechism is simply how we can know God exists by way of our unaided natural reason. So this is just observing things in the universe, experiencing things in the universe, and then thinking philosophically and rationally about what we observe and experience. This is not theology or revelation or religion or Catholicism or the Bible. This is just our own rational intelligence. So paragraph 31 wrapped up by saying there are basically 2 points of departure from which we get the observation, the experiences that we then think rationally about and come to the conclusion that God exists. The first is the world, and this is paragraph number 32. It's talking about evidence we experience in the world, and when the Catechism says the world, it means the universe, right? Just the whole of creation. I like to nuance out the concept of the universe just a little bit, and this is how I would kind of present the concept of universe to my philosophy classes. When I used to teach philosophy, I would say, just for ease of use and understanding, because as we know, there's all kinds of different theories about the universe and what it entails, and there might be multiverses or expanding and contracting bubble universes, on and on. In order to kind of just take all of that and place it under a single term, the universe, and again, here the Catechism is just going to say the world. What I propose is that we use as our definition of the universe or the world, everything which exists but is not God. So let me say that again. The universe, or in this case for the Catechism, the world, is everything which exists but is not God. Now notice that definition should be equally handy for both theists, those who believe that there is a God, and for atheists. Because of course, for theists, we're going to say there is the universe, everything which exists but is not God, and then there is God, who brought the universe into existence and who holds the universe in existence. For the atheist, on the same definition, the universe is everything which exists but is not God. There is the universe, everything which exists but is not God, and that's it. Nothing else. All that exists is the universe. Okay, and atheists, although atheist is definitely an umbrella term, and there's a million different nuances and types of atheists, and they would self-define their atheism in a bunch of different ways. For the most part, very few atheists are also pantheists. Pantheism just being the idea that the universe is God. God is the universe. So for a pantheist, we might have to massage that a little bit differently, but most atheists are not pantheists. Okay, so here we go. Let's jump into paragraph 32. Now, paragraph 32 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church actually has 2 citations. One from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, and the second from St. Augustine. They're both fairly lengthy quotations. I am going to read the first one from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. I'm not going to read the second one. I'm going to leave that to you to jump into the Catechism, pull up paragraph 32 and read the St. Augustine quote, which is great, but it just sort of nuances and repeats the same point that's made by the text and then the citation from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Okay, so paragraph 32, the world. Starting from movement, becoming, contingency, and the world's order and beauty, one can come to a knowledge of God as the origin and the end of the universe. Okay, there's a lot there. You'll notice I say that all the time. Every time I read a paragraph from the Catechism, it's because honestly, as I'm reading it, although I've taught from the Catechism for many, many, many years now, every time I go back and reread a paragraph from the Catechism, it immediately impresses on me again, there is so much packed into these paragraphs. You could quite literally, I don't mean this to be hyperbole at all, you could quite literally write doctoral dissertations on each single paragraph in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. No doubt some people have. Okay, so the world, starting from movement, becoming, contingency, and the world's order and beauty, one can come to a knowledge of God as the origin and the end of the universe. Let's just take that apart, and then we'll get to that quote from St. Paul. Okay, first thing to say, what the Catechism is doing here, although it isn't announcing it to we, the readers of the Catechism, is it's listing these fundamental intrinsic features of the very structure of the universe. The structure and the function of the universe manifest these characteristics, these features. One of them is movement. Movement is a philosophical term, or it's being used philosophically here because, again, we're just talking about applying philosophy and reason, logic to what can be observed and experienced in the universe to know that God exists. So with that kind of philosophical preset in place, then the Catechism is using movement to mean change, all change. Any movement from this state of being to that state of being, from this state of affairs to that state of affairs, even movement through time, the movement from then to now, from past to present, from present to future. So movement is meant to just convey change, any alteration. So we live in a universe which is observably and experientially, obviously not static. Things change, things move all the time. Even things which don't appear to be moving. Think of, and here again, science makes great contributions, gives us a lot of data and new knowledge to philosophize about, to think rationally about. Science has now drilled down into not only atoms, but subatomic particles and then subatomic particles, which means that we've actually discovered that even for things that look like they're not moving, I mean, if you unfold a lawn chair and sit in front of a rock and stare at it for an entire afternoon, it is going to look as though that rock has not changed, has not moved at all. It's just sitting there, and you're sitting there staring at it. Sounds like a really boring afternoon, but of course science has now told us if you could only see that rock at the atomic and subatomic level, you would realize that elementally that rock that seems to not be moving or changing is in fact moving and changing constantly as electrons and protons and neutrons and then quarks and nanons and et cetera, are all moving around in this vast, constant symphony of motion at the atomic and subatomic level. So the whole universe is in motion. We see this, we experience this all the time. Second, becoming. Now, becoming is, a point I wanted to make. I took myself off down a tangent so that I could go stare at a rock for an afternoon. When we look at these fundamental features of the universe that we observe and experience, movement, becoming, contingency, and the order and the beauty of the world, what the church is actually doing here is it is giving us kind of keywords to St. Thomas Aquinas's 5 ways or 5 proofs for the existence of God. Thomas Aquinas develops 5 famous ways of coming to know that God exists. And Aquinas, like the Catechism in this section, is proposing and arguing for the existence of God without any recourse to theology or revelation or Catholic doctrine or dogma or scripture, but simply using unaided human reason, logic, philosophy, and rational intelligence applied to what we can observe and experience in the universe. And so each of these terms, these fundamental features, corresponds to one of Aquinas's 5 ways. So the argument for the existence of God from movement, the argument for the existence of God from becoming or efficient causality, as Aquinas would term it, the argument for the existence of God from contingency, meaning things which exist but don't exist necessarily, could possibly not exist or could cease to exist or come into existence. And then finally, from the order, the degrees of perfection in the world, kind of the hierarchy of perfections in created things. And then beauty, the harmony, and things moving towards their given end, given by way of the nature of the thing itself. Okay, so that's a lot of philosophy speak. I'm not going to deep dive into any of those things. You can certainly go and look up Aquinas's 5 ways. They're easy to find. They're very popular, and they continue to be very, very persuasive and helpful ways for reasoning logically and philosophically to God's existence. But here the Catechism is simply making a tangential reference to Aquinas' arguments by agreeing with Aquinas that in observing and experiencing these features of the universe, we can reason our way to God's existence. Okay, so the second one is becoming. We see things developing according to their nature, but we also see things coming into being. We see things being caused, being brought into existence. And so if things are being caused or being brought into existence, then they need a first cause, an uncaused cause. There can't be an infinite chain of causes, each explaining itself by pointing behind itself to the thing which caused it. That can't go on forever. Eventually, it has to hit a backstop. It has to hit a source of all cause, which itself is not just another caused thing. That thing we call God. For movement, we see that things change, they move, and in the same way, anything that moves or changes is moved or changed by something else. And so then we have to ask the question of anything we observe in the universe, anything we experience in the universe, well, what caused it? What's moving it? Why is it changing? And of course, that thing would have to point behind itself to say, well, I was moved by that thing. But then when we turn our attention to that thing and its movement and its change, it would also say, well, I was moved or changed by this prior thing. And on it goes. Once again, you can't have that chain regress forever. Eventually, there has to be an unmoved mover. And so Aristotle actually came to the same conclusion. And of course, he died 250 years before Christ was even born, so long before the Christian revelation or the Catholic intellectual tradition got underway. But the Catholic intellectual tradition borrows from, and in a sense baptizes, kind of upgrades by way of adding theology, the great Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle primarily, although certainly some of their later disciples as well. And so the unmoved mover who gives movement or change to everything in the universe, including the movement from non-existence to existence for the universe itself and everything in it, we call God. The uncaused cause, that which makes things become what they are by their nature meant to be. Again, that uncaused cause we call God. And then contingency, another fancy philosophy word. Contingency simply means beings, things, entities, which exist, but don't exist necessarily. Meaning, it's possible for these things to exist, but it's also possible for these things to not exist, or to cease existing, or to come into existence. And in order for a thing which doesn't exist to begin to exist, it requires something to bring it into existence, to cause its existence. So contingency is both a thing for which existence and non-existence are both possible, and it's a thing which, if it exists, receives its existence. And so we look around the universe and we see, well, that describes everything. Everything that we observe and experience in the universe is not self-explanatory, could possibly exist, but it could also possibly not exist, comes into being, and then eventually goes out of being. And so we look at all the things in the universe and say, well, everything is contingent, which means that everything is also a receiver of existence. It does not just exist, it receives existence. So where Aquinas, and then the paragraph 32 in the Catechism are going to go with that, is going to say if there are contingent beings, there must be a necessary being. A being for which non-existence is impossible. And a being which does not receive existence from another, it is not a receiver existence, but is itself the source of all existence. It brings all the contingent beings that we see in the universe into existence and holds them in existence because they're not self-explanatory. They have contingent things, receivers of existence. Again, everything in the universe, ourselves included, not only does not have the power to bring itself into existence, it doesn't have the power to hold itself in existence, meaning every contingent thing needs an explanation both for its coming to be and for its continuing to be. So when we look at this necessary being, this source of all being and existence, we're actually looking at existence itself, at being itself. And this is Aquinas' conclusion. You could think of it this way. Just think, for anything to be, being itself must be. For anything to exist, existence itself must exist necessarily. So this necessary being, which does not receive existence but gives existence to everything else, and which is self-explanatory. This is what we call God. And then finally talks about the order and beauty of the world. So just the order of the universe with the great laws. And when we see law, and of course there are laws written into the universe, all these the laws of physics and the constants, the physical constants of the universe, strong and weak nuclear force, the gravitational force, all those kind of constants and laws just reveal to us that there's a lawgiver, right? Someone imposed these laws on the physical universe by which the universe moves and develops and functions, and all the overlapping systems that we observe and experience in the universe. And so when we look at the order, we see law. We see law, and so we immediately understand that there's a lawgiver, that there's someone who imposes order. And then when we look at the beauty of the universe, we see that each thing is given a nature, and each nature has a purpose, and that things tend towards the fulfillment of their nature. And so we look at the universe as this great work of art, which of course means there's an artist. We see the beautiful artistry, the beauty and superfluous beauty, right? God didn't have to make the universe beautiful, but he did as sort of like a love note to us, who he gave the power to observe it and to appreciate that beauty and to see him in it. Okay, so in all these ways then, we observe and experience the universe, and then we reason from what we observe and experience to God. From movement, from becoming, from contingency, from the order and the beauty of the world, we reason our way to the creator of the world. If it's helpful, just think of it this way. We live in God's universe. He created it. He brought it into existence. He holds it in existence, and he marks it with intelligibility, and then gives us intelligence, rational intelligence, reason, to be able, which maps onto the intelligible universe, the structured, ordered, law-governed universe that he created, so that we could look at the universe and understand it. And understanding it could look beyond it to the one who created it. It's as though God left his fingerprints all over his universe for us to discover. Johann Kepler, great astronomer, and kind of one of the Mount Rushmore figures of the scientific revolution. Johann Kepler said of being a scientist, a mathematician, an astronomer, an observer of the physical universe, he said the scientist has the great privilege of thinking God's thoughts after him. What a beautiful thing. Okay, so now to St. Paul's quote. This is from Romans chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. As St. Paul says of the Gentiles, and again, this is cited in paragraph 32 of the Catechism. As St. Paul says of the Gentiles, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So what St. Paul is saying there. Now remember, this is from the letter to the Romans. The Romans are Gentiles. The Romans are pagans. The Romans are not Jews. They are not inheritors of the Judaic worldview. They are not inheritors of the sacred scriptures of the Old Testament. They are pagans. They're polytheists. And so when St. Paul is writing this in his letter to the Romans, and notice it's in the first chapter, he gets after this point right away. He knows who he's writing to. Remember, St. Paul is not only a Pharisee, not only a highly educated Jew, he's also a Roman citizen. So he's evangelizing the Gentiles, and he makes this very strong claim to the Romans. He says, even though you're pagans, even though you're Gentiles, even though you are not inheritors of the Judaic monotheistic worldview, you can look at the natural world and see revealed there the invisible nature of the Creator God, his power and his deity, his lordship over created things. And this is simply what the Catechism is echoing in paragraph 32. St. Paul will go on to say an even more serious thing, following the verse that I just read. He says, so they are without excuse, because God has made himself known to them, even to the Gentiles. He's made himself known to them in the things he has made. If we observe the universe and refuse to acknowledge where it leads and refuse to see the one who reveals himself to us through the universe, then we are culpable for that. We are responsible for rejecting the truth that God made plain to us in the beautiful universe that he created. All right, that's paragraph number 32. We'll now move on to paragraph number 33, which talks about the evidence for God's existence that we see in ourselves, in our own human nature. So stay tuned. In the meantime, remember the church has what the world needs, so learn your faith, live your faith, and share your faith.